There are pains that leave no marks on the body and rarely find words to explain them. They're invisible wounds, hard to name, yet deeply felt. One of the hardest to endure is the heartbreak a mother feels when her child, once adored, once eagerly awaited, seems unable to recognize her worth. This kind of sorrow doesn't come all at once. It builds quietly over time, through small signs of indifference, through things left unsaid, through visits that grow further apart. The mother who was once the sun around which her child revolved, the one who gave love, shelter, and comfort, now finds herself feeling like a stranger in her own child's presence. Hugs lose their warmth, conversations turn cold, and where once her presence was a source of joy, it is now barely tolerated. What could cause such a painful transformation? Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, saw the human mind as a battlefield of unconscious forces. To him, our deepest bonds were also the most tangled. The growing distance between a mother and her child is rarely something done with intention. Instead, it often stems from hidden emotional patterns that began long ago, shaped by early needs, fears, and conflicts that may never fully surface. Freud believed that the people we love most are also those we're most likely to hold conflicted feelings toward. This inner tension is part of being human. For a child, the mother is the first emotional anchor, and those early bonds are intense. But as the child grows and seeks a sense of identity, they must begin to pull away, build their own space, and gain independence. This natural process, however, can come with hidden burdens, guilt, resentment, frustration, that may later turn without intention against the very woman who gave them life. In this video, we'll explore 7 possible psychological reasons grounded in Freud's ideas that might explain why a child could end up devaluing their own mother. You'll see that more often than not, this behavior doesn't come from a lack of love. Instead, it reflects unresolved emotional battles, old wounds that never healed quite right, and defense mechanisms the child built to shield themselves. If you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or made to feel small by the very person to whom you gave so much of yourself, your pain is real. But also know this, it's likely not because of anything you did wrong. It often has more to do with what the other person is carrying inside. This video isn't meant to make you feel sad or to stir up resentment. Its goal is to shine a light on the hidden dynamics at play, so you can begin to see things more clearly, and maybe with more compassion, including for yourself. Understanding what's really happening is the first step toward letting go of guilt that never should have been yours. It's a way to stop bearing the weight of blame that doesn't belong to you. It's also a step toward self-love, because the worth of a mother isn't defined by whether her child acknowledges it. It exists on its own quietly and powerfully. Maybe today you're looking for answers. Maybe you're searching for a name for the kind of pain that doesn't speak out loud. Let this video serve as what Freud called a process of working through where hidden truths begin to come to light, and healing can finally begin. Reason 1. The unresolved Oedipus complex. As Freud laid the foundation of psychoanalysis, he identified one of the most powerful and universal emotional conflicts in early childhood, the Oedipus complex. He described it as a mix of love and rivalry that children feel toward their parents, with a particular focus on the mother. In a young child's eyes, the mother is everything: love, care, safety, and survival. She becomes his first love, his first desire, and his first sense of emotional security. At the same time, the child sees the father as a barrier to this exclusive connection. On some deep level, he wants to be the one and only in his mother's heart. He longs to be her entire world with no competition. But as he grows, reality steps in. The father, or whoever represents that paternal authority, sets boundaries. Society lays out its rules. Even the mother gently teaches the child that he cannot be her whole world. According to Freud, this early disappointment is necessary. It helps the child understand he isn't the center of everything that love is shared, and that others matter too. Still, not every child moves through this phase without emotional bruises. If the Oedipus complex isn't worked through in a healthy way, it lingers in the unconscious and shapes the person's future relationship, especially with the mother. What happens when this process stalls or fails? As an adult, the son might carry unresolved and conflicting emotions toward his mother without even realizing it. You can love her deeply and still carry resentment toward her. You may crave her approval, yet push her away in an effort to assert your independence. These opposing feelings often lead to guilt, and in trying to escape that guilt, you might begin to pull away emotionally. What seems like coldness, ingratitude, or disrespect is often just an unconscious attempt to resolve an inner conflict that's never been fully understood. In order to grow emotionally, the child must in some symbolic way sever the tie that keeps them emotionally dependent on their mother. They need to stand on their own, even if that means ignoring or downplaying the person who ironically laid the foundation for their upbringing. Freud explained that to the unconscious mind, separating from one's mother feels like an inner tug-of-war between the desire to belong and the yearning to be free. That battle can produce guilt so profound that the psyche protects itself by turning it into emotional detachment or subtle criticism. It's not that the child doesn't care for the mother. It's that to avoid the pain of facing these mixed emotions, denial becomes the chosen path. This internal struggle is even more visible in cultures where independence and autonomy are held up as virtues, and emotional dependence is looked down upon as a weakness. A child eager to be seen as a grown-up may feel they must cut those symbolic ties to their mother, and often does so abruptly, unaware of just how deep that rupture goes. Sometimes this leads to unfair criticism, a lack of gratitude and emotional distance that hurts both sides. The child unconsciously projects onto the mother all their unresolved childhood frustrations lingering, guilt, and repressed desires. The mother feels the loss, but often can't make sense of what's caused the distance. Freud never placed blame on either party. He understood that these patterns are rooted in the very architecture of the human mind. Understanding this doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or excusing painful behavior. It simply shows that many times the hurt doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from the internal battle we each face on the path to becoming our own person. Through the lens of psychoanalysis, we start to see that what looks like scorn or apathy from a child can actually mask a connection so emotionally intense it becomes too heavy to bear. On the surface, it feels like a confusing old love, tangled up in desires and boundaries that were never fully worked through. If you see this dynamic in your own life, it doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're being called to look more deeply at the hidden roots of your relationships, and more importantly, to release the guilt that was never yours to carry. As Freud taught, the real freedom of the soul comes from becoming aware of what lies beneath the surface. Reason 2: shifting blame and unspoken frustration. One of Freud's most profound insights was that much of what we feel and direct toward others actually comes from unresolved inner struggles that we don't even realize exist. When adult reality doesn't match up with the hopes we formed in childhood, it's natural to feel disappointed, hurt, even powerless. But the ego, vulnerable to such feelings, tries to shield itself. One way it does that is by pointing the finger at someone else. In the case of a mother-child relationship, this tendency can become especially strong. The mother, who was once the child's first experience of love and care, also becomes the first target for all the heartbreaks life later brings. When adult children go through hardship, whether in their careers, relationships, or inner lives, The unconscious often looks for someone to blame for the pain, and all too often that blame lands on the mother. As painful as this is, it's not a choice made on purpose. The adult child doesn't sit down and think, "I'll make my mom responsible for everything that's gone wrong." Instead, it's a built-in reflex driven by the unconscious need to protect one's sense of worth. Owning up to mistakes, facing bad decisions, or accepting the harshness of adult life can be too much to bear. So blaming the mother becomes a psychological escape hatch. Freud called this defense mechanism projection. Projection is the act of assigning to someone else the very feelings, impulses, or faults we are struggling with ourselves. A child who's angry about their own shortcomings might start believing their mother caused all their unhappiness. If I'm not happy, it must be because she failed me somehow. This unconscious illusion offers a kind of comfort. It's easier to cling to it than to face the reality that pain is often just part of living, no matter how good the beginning might have been. Another important piece of this dynamic lies in how the child's unconscious mind views the mother. She's not just a real person, she's a symbol of endless safety. From her, there was an unspoken expectation, boundless love, perfect understanding, and an ability to soothe every wound and fulfill every need. But life doesn't work that way. Eventually, whether because of human limitations or life's unpredictable turns, she falls short of that ideal image. And when that happens, the child feels betrayed. That letdown, even if it's never spoken out loud, sinks deep into the unconscious. Later in life, it may rise to the surface as bitterness. That bitterness doesn't always come out through angry words or visible distance. Sometimes it's more subtle, a constant chill in the room, a quiet disdain hiding behind polite indifference, or a steady stream of muted criticism that never really stops. It's as if the adult child is saying, without realizing it, "You were supposed to be perfect, so I could be happy. And since you weren't now, you carry the weight of my resentment." Freud understood this as a clash between two inner forces, the pleasure principle and the reality principle. The pleasure principle longs for a life free of hurt, free of disappointment. But the reality principle insists we face the truth about the world, about others, and about ourselves. And when the reality principle shows up in a painful way, the emotionally immature ego looks for someone to blame. The first attachment figure becomes the obvious target. Understanding this doesn't make the mother's pain disappear. It doesn't excuse cruelty or thanklessness, but it sheds new light on what's happening. The child's rejection isn't necessarily a reflection of how much love they received. More often, it reveals a struggle happening inside them. And that struggle isn't about fairness, it's about emotional survival. Sometimes these reactions are even shaped by unconscious family patterns. If the household was full of unspoken guilt, unrealistic expectations, or unclear boundaries, the child may grow up with a habit of blaming someone for their dissatisfaction. And because the mother is the central figure, she naturally becomes the one they pin it all on. When the mother begins to see this, she can start to let go of a guilt that never belonged to her. She can recognize that her child, though unaware, is fighting an inner war that only they can win. Often the greatest act of love is to acknowledge this silent pain without taking it on as your own. Freud believed healing begins when we're willing to look at the parts of ourselves we've projected onto others and admit they might just be mirrors of our own unhealed wounds. That moment of recognition, though painful, marks the beginning of true emotional freedom. With that in mind, let's move into the next reason where we'll explore another side of this emotional divide, the deep frustration tied to an unconscious longing to be the one and only. Reason 3. The frustration of the unconscious desire for exclusivity. From the very first days of life, babies form a powerful emotional bond with their mothers. In the eyes of the infant, she becomes the entire world, the source of warmth, nourishment, love, and safety. That connection is so intense that it plants a hidden expectation to be the only one who holds her love, to be the one who owns her heart completely. In those early months, this illusion seems true. The mother is often fully immersed in caring for her child, giving almost all her attention to that single little life. The baby, not yet able to separate themselves from everything around them, feels one with her. There's no real sense of me versus her. She feels like an extension of their being, and the love she gives feels total and undivided. But time moves on, and reality enters the scene. Other people show up: fathers, siblings, relatives, friends. The demands of adult life take hold. The mother can't and shouldn't focus entirely on her child anymore. She has to divide her time, her energy, and her love. For the young child, this shift feels like betrayal. It creates a wound deep in their sense of self, because it brings a hard truth into the light. They are not the absolute center of everything. What once felt like guaranteed exclusivity is suddenly at risk. And with that comes anger, sadness, insecurity, and most of all, a sense of something precious being lost. Freud saw this as a natural and necessary step in a child's psychological growth. Children have to learn that love is something shared, that others exist in the world besides themselves, and that life doesn't revolve solely around their wants. But not every child navigates this reality with ease. When the deep, unconscious desire to be the one and only isn't processed well, it often turns into a lingering resentment. That resentment doesn't always show itself right away. It can stay hidden for years, quietly waiting for the right moment to surface. In adolescence or adulthood, it may appear as emotional distance, criticism, coldness, or quiet disdain toward the mother. The child won't say, "I'm hurt because you didn't give me exclusive love." Instead, they behave as if she let them down in some unspoken way, like she failed to meet a demand that no one could realistically fulfill. Deep down in the unconscious, she becomes the symbol of their first great disappointment. It doesn't matter how much love she gave, how devoted she was, or what she sacrificed. For the child still carrying this wound, the mother becomes the one who shattered the illusion that they were the center of the universe. And losing that illusion, even though it's part of growing up, hurts. Often this unconscious pain is amplified by real-life family events. A new sibling, a divorce, or shifts in the family dynamic can all reinforce the belief that the mother chose someone else, turned away, or even betrayed them. These impressions, however, exaggerated or distorted, sink into the unconscious and shape how the child sees their mother later in life. Freud emphasized that the unconscious doesn't operate on a timeline. Feelings buried in early childhood don't simply fade as the years go by. They continue to affect thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. So when an adult child seems cold or overly critical of their mother, they may, without realizing it, be reliving the pain of not being the sole focus of her unconditional love. This understanding doesn't take away a mother's pain. It reframes it. That emotional distance or apparent disregard often stems from an unresolved wound from childhood, not a true reflection of who she was as a mother. Accepting that a mother's love can never be completely exclusive is a hard truth for the inner child we all carry. It requires a deep emotional reckoning, something most people don't do consciously. Many choose criticism, detachment, or indifference instead, because it's easier to reject than to revisit the grief of that early loss. But when a mother understands this pattern, She can begin to release the guilt that so often weighs her down. She can recognize that her so-called failure wasn't a lack of love, but simply the reality of being human with her own needs, limits, and connections. And if her child can't yet see that it may be because they're still silently grappling with the impossible expectations of the child they once were. Freud reminded us that maturity comes from facing the inevitable losses life brings. The loss of that original closeness with the mother, the loss of being the only one, the loss of cherished illusions. These losses are painful, but through them we come to know who we really are. May this insight bring even a small measure of peace to mothers who feel forgotten. Because love, even when unacknowledged, becomes part of the invisible foundation within the soul of the one who received it. Reason 4. Idealization and disappointment. In childhood, a mother holds an almost sacred place in a child's imagination. She is seen as the ultimate protector, the one who chases away fear, the answer to every need. At that age, the child's mind isn't ready to grasp human complexity, so it paints the mother as flawless, tireless, all-powerful. To the child, she's nearly divine, quietly capable of anything, and never letting them down. This kind of idealization, to a degree, is essential. It creates the emotional security a child needs to face the world with courage. Believing there's someone absolutely trustworthy and loving allows the child to take those first steps into life with confidence. The trouble begins when this perfect image is inevitably confronted by reality. As the child grows, they begin to notice that their mother is just like everyone else human. She has flaws, limitations, worries, and moments of weakness. She gets angry, feels tired, isn't always around, and sometimes makes choices the child doesn't like. She makes mistakes because she's human. This realization marks a turning point in how the child sees her. The once idealized figure is now viewed through a more critical lens. For many, this shift happens naturally and in a healthy way. Emotional growth means learning to love someone not because they're perfect, but because they're real. But for those who struggle with this transition, the fall from grace feels like betrayal. A child who can't process disappointment often turns it into resentment. They become upset with their mother for not living up to the unconscious expectations they carried. Instead of accepting the mother as she truly is, a person with strengths and shortcomings, they reject that reality and cling to their bitterness. This resentment often shows itself through coldness, dismissiveness, or constant criticism. Freud understood this tug-of-war of emotions as a form of emotional ambivalence. The same person, in this case, the mother, can be both deeply loved and intensely resented at the same time. This kind of inner conflict often brings about feelings of guilt and unease, pushing a person to lean on psychological defenses to ease the emotional strain. One of the most common defenses is a kind of negative idealization. If the mother isn't flawless, then she's seen as entirely inadequate. There's no space for gray areas or for understanding complexity. The mind holds on to the same black and white thinking from childhood, but flipped. If she's not perfect, then she must be broken. And if she's broken, she doesn't deserve empathy. This inability to accept another person's flaws often mirrors an even deeper struggle: the inability to come to terms with one's own imperfections. A child who can't accept their mother's humanity is, in truth, refusing to face their own. They demand from others the very things they're afraid to confront in themselves: mistakes, weakness, vulnerability. This disappointment often gets anchored in specific memories, moments when the child felt helpless or unseen. It doesn't take much: an unkind word, an unexplained absence, a lack of comfort at a crucial time for a child's unconscious mind to record a sense of betrayal from the person they trusted the most. Later in life, if those moments haven't been understood and healed, they can resurface as a persistent, simmering resentment. The adult child may not have the words to name the real root of their pain, so instead they blame their mother for the unhappiness they feel now. As a form of self-protection, they pull away emotionally, downplay her good qualities, and act as if she doesn't matter. But it's important to see that this kind of response isn't born from a lack of love. It comes from an inability to hold love and disappointment in the same emotional space. Freud teaches us that growing up means learning to love people even when they're not perfect. Emotional maturity is about being able to stay connected, to keep caring, even when those we love fall short. For mothers, understanding this can bring a deep sense of release. It can help them realize that their child's coldness or harsh judgment is not a true reflection of their worth as a person or as a mother. It stems from an emotional struggle inside the child. There's no need to carry the weight of not being perfect. No one is. Human life is built on imperfections, and real love doesn't just survive in spite of them, it grows through them. So if your child seems to judge you too harshly, remember this. Your human flaws don't erase the love you've given. In fact, it's in your humanness that the beauty of your care truly shines. And even if they can't yet see it, the love you poured into them remains steady and quiet, like the foundation of a home, holding them up in ways they don't even realize. Reason 5. The resentment that comes from childhood dependence. In those early years, a child relies completely on their mother. Without her, they wouldn't survive. This total dependence shapes the deepest parts of a person's emotional world. To a small child, the mother is everything: life, warmth, food, safety. But as time goes on, a natural need for independence begins to emerge. The child wants to build their own sense of self, to explore the world, to move through life on their own terms. That shift from total dependence to autonomy is one of the most delicate transitions in the human psyche. Freud believed that while childhood dependence is natural, it leaves behind mixed emotional traces. On one hand, it creates deep bonds and feelings of gratitude. On the other, it can stir resentment. Being so utterly reliant on another human being can, on an unconscious level, feel humiliating. It awakens a sense of powerlessness. These emotions may be softened by love and affection, but they don't just disappear. They remain buried, waiting for the right moment to rise up. As children grow and work to define themselves, the memory of being so vulnerable can feel uncomfortable. To prove they're strong and capable, they often feel the need to push away the one person who reminds them of that former helplessness, their mother. This rejection isn't always loud or dramatic. It can show up in subtle ways: a cold glance, a forgotten phone call, a quiet criticism. But what's really being rejected isn't the mother herself, it's what she symbolizes. She is the living reminder of a time when survival depended completely on someone else. Freud described this as a necessary psychic break, a symbolic separation from the mother, so that the individual can fully step into their own identity. It's a second kind of birth, the emotional birth that follows the physical one. When this emotional separation doesn't happen in a healthy way, the child may fall into patterns of diminishing the mother's role. They begin to rewrite their own story. I didn't really need her. She wasn't that important. I made it on my own. These stories aren't told with full awareness. They are subconscious defenses, shields against the pain of acknowledging how strong that bond really was and how fragile it made them feel. In cultures where independence and self-sufficiency are held up as the ultimate goals, this process becomes even more intense. Admitting to any kind of dependence, especially emotional, is often seen as a sign of weakness. When a child feels compelled to erase any trace of past vulnerability from their personal history, it creates a quiet but painful rift. The mother, unaware of this hidden struggle, is left feeling hurt by the distance, the coldness, and what seems like a lack of gratitude. Her pain is real. It's the sorrow of someone who gave everything only to be met later with silence or detachment. But when viewed through the lens of psychoanalysis, we see that this pain doesn't stem from a lack of love. Instead, it arises from the child's inner conflict, trying to reconcile two truths, once being completely dependent, and now yearning to be entirely independent. Freud described this as a core tension in human development, the wish to be free without severing one's roots. Yet the path to that freedom often involves rejecting the past and minimizing those who laid the foundation. Understanding this helps a mother begin to release some of the guilt and sorrow. She can come to see that her sacrifices weren't for nothing, even if her child can't currently express appreciation. Ironically, the very dependence the child is now trying to reject is what allowed them to reach this point. Without the love, care, and steady support provided in childhood, the independence they now prize wouldn't have been possible. This realization doesn't erase the pain, but it changes its shape. It reshapes the ache of rejection into a deeper compassion for her child's emotional immaturity. It softens bitterness into calm acceptance. A child who dismisses their mother's worth doesn't erase the journey that brought them here. Their very existence stands as undeniable proof of the love they received. Even if their gestures and words fail to acknowledge it, the truth lives on, quietly etched into the deepest layers of their being. Freud reminds us that true maturity involves embracing one's origins with gratitude, without needing to push them away to stand alone. Some children reach that stage of awareness. Others may never get there. But that doesn't lessen the worth of what was given. To love without being recognized in return is among the noblest capacities of the human spirit. And every mother who has loved like this carries within her a quiet greatness that no passage of time, no silence, no distance can erase. Reason 6. Internalizing a critical father figure. In his exploration of psychological development, Freud introduced the idea of introjection, the process by which a child absorbs parental figures, taking in their attitudes, values, and judgments. Through this mechanism, the superego begins to form the inner structure that governs morality, guilt, and the lifelong weight of personal expectations. In the mother-son relationship, the presence of a father or father-like authority plays a powerful role, often without either party realizing it. When a child grows up witnessing a father who criticizes, belittles, or treats the mother with indifference, these behaviors can seep in and later be replayed, all without the child's conscious intent. For a young mind, parents serve as the first examples of what's admirable or shameful, lovable or dismissible. If the father, seen as the dominant figure, shows disregard toward the mother, even subtly, the child wanting approval and love often falls in line with that judgment. Over time, he may adopt a diminished view of his mother, even if she was loving, selfless, and consistently present. This process doesn't unfold in a logical way. It occurs deep within the layers of the child's inner world. The child doesn't deliberately choose to look down on the mother. He simply reenacts the emotional patterns absorbed during his early years. As time goes on, these early impressions become part of his psychological framework. Instead of seeing his mother for who she truly is, he filters her through inherited criticism, and the emotional unfairness continues. Freud emphasized that the superego is deeply shaped by how a child interprets their parents' behavior. When there's disrespect, humiliation, or scorn in the household, those early experiences sculpt not just the child's view of others, but of themselves. If the mother was treated as lesser, the child may grow up believing that she truly was unworthy, less valuable, less deserving of affection or praise. That belief, lodged firmly in the unconscious, can direct how he acts as an adult, often without him fully realizing it. Freud also noted something else. Children instinctively try to align themselves with the figure they see as most powerful. It's their way of securing emotional safety. When a father asserts his authority in a dominating way and consistently undermines the mother, the child may take on his perspective in an effort to feel safe. The child often mimics the same criticisms, keeps the same emotional distance, and shows the same coldness not out of cruelty, but out of a deep unconscious loyalty to the figure he's identified as strong and trustworthy. Taking in this disapproving view of the mother can severely distort the child's emotional perception. Even if he does love her, that love becomes tainted by a quiet conviction that she doesn't quite deserve his full admiration. This inner clash between affection and disdain becomes unbearable to the unconscious mind. To ease that inner turmoil, the child often gravitates toward belittling her. These ingrained beliefs don't always stay hidden. They tend to surface when emotions are running high or during times of stress. In those moments, the mother often becomes the target of sharp words, merciless judgments, and an attitude that erases the years of care and love she's given. And for the mother who has no awareness of this invisible mechanism, the hurt cuts deep. Understanding how a father's critical stance becomes internalized doesn't excuse the pain caused, but it does help reveal a crucial truth: that the child's rejection is often less about the actual relationship he had with his mother, and more about unconscious patterns he's inherited without ever questioning. It's not always just the father who contributes to this dynamic either. Other authority figures, grandparents, step-parents, or even society itself, can reinforce harmful views of women, especially in cultures where women's roles have been historically dismissed or minimized. When these messages take root in early childhood, they become the lens through which the child evaluates his mother's worth. And unless that lens is challenged, the emotional injustice continues. For the mother who feels dismissed or unappreciated today, recognizing this can bring a sense of release. The scorn she's felt doesn't reflect who she is or the love she's poured out. It echoes old voices, voices that aren't hers, but that her child carries within without even knowing it. Freud reminds us that true emotional freedom begins the moment we learn to separate what genuinely belongs to us from what others have planted in our minds. Maybe the child will do that inner work someday. Maybe he won't. But either way, the mother's worth remains untouched. It does not hinge on whether someone else sees it. Her value is inherent. It's woven into every act of love, support, presence, and care, even in silence, even in the face of ingratitude. Now onto another reason: the buried wish for freedom and the guilt it brings. Growing into adulthood means gaining freedom. Freedom to think, to choose, to walk one's own path. But as Freud pointed out, becoming independent rarely comes without emotional struggle, especially when it comes to the relationship with one's mother. In childhood, the mother often represents the entire universe. She's the one who welcomes, nurtures, protects, and meets not just a child's needs, but also their tenderest emotions. That bond runs so deep that the idea of separation feels impossible. A mother's love in early life feels all-encompassing, almost like the two are one. But for a person to truly grow, this early fusion must come to an end. The child must step away, carve out their own identity, and face the world with their own will. That natural move toward independence is essential, but it's also packed with unconscious guilt. Freud observed that the desire to break away from one's mother is often pushed deep down because it clashes with the memory of her unconditional love and the early dependence they shared. In the unconscious mind, loving her and wanting to move away from her seem like things that just can't go together. So mixed feelings begin to emerge. While reaching for freedom, the child wrestles with guilt for pulling away. And this guilt is heavy, hard to name, and rarely shown directly. It might look like annoyance, emotional distance, indifference, or even contempt. It's often easier to devalue the mother than to face the grief that comes with knowing that growing up means leaving something precious behind. To cope with that guilt, the child may quietly reduce the mother's significance in their mind. If she wasn't all that important, if she wasn't as present as they once thought, then stepping away doesn't seem so painful. It's an unconscious defense, a way to protect oneself from the hurt of walking away from the first deep emotional bond in life. Freud explained this process in his writings on mourning and melancholia. Just as we grieve when we lose a loved one, but must eventually let go, the journey into adulthood involves mourning the loss of that early mother-child unity in order to step into one's full self. And just like with grief, the child often handles this by downplaying what they've lost. They diminish the mother to avoid the pain. They criticize her so they don't have to miss her. They pull away so they don't have to face their own vulnerability. It's not something they do consciously, but the pain it causes is real. A mother may end up feeling unwanted, left behind, like she no longer matters. She feels a growing distance from those she once nurtured and protected, all while carrying a burden of guilt that was never hers to begin, with the haunting feeling that maybe, just maybe, she messed up when it mattered most. But the truth is, in many situations, the child's pain over growing apart is so intense, they cope by shutting down emotionally. Instead of acknowledging how much their mother means to them and feeling the ache of being apart, they try to numb themselves. They start to believe and want her to believe that they don't really need her anymore. But this denial doesn't erase their love. It simply buries it beneath layers of emotional armor. That love, though unspoken, remains hidden in the quieter corners of their unconscious mind. Freud taught that reaching emotional maturity means learning to live with these contradictions, to accept that you can love deeply while still craving independence. Without this emotional reckoning, a person stays trapped in a tug-of-war that slowly sabotages their most meaningful relationships. When a son seems incapable of appreciating his mother, what we're often witnessing is this very entrapment caught between love and guilt. Gratitude and the urge to break free, closeness and the drive to pull away. Seeing this more clearly can change how a mother interprets her child's behavior. She may begin to understand that pulling away isn't always about a lack of love. It's often a sign of the storm inside him. With time and emotional growth, he might one day be able to fully recognize and honor her worth, something he can't quite do yet. But even if that day never comes, one thing remains true. A mother's love, once given, leaves an imprint that time cannot erase. Sometimes real love means allowing the other person to take their own path, even if that path leads them away from you for a while. This kind of love runs so deep it's not always easy to grasp right away. Freud reminded us that emotional freedom takes courage. The courage to love, without trying to possess the courage to let go while still honoring the bond, the courage to accept the messiness of our emotions. Let every mother who feels forgotten know this: your presence shaped your child's life in ways you might never fully understand. Freud taught us that our unconscious minds hold emotions we can't always bring to the surface. When a child grows cold or distant, it's rarely about intentional rejection. It's usually the result of unresolved struggles within them that even they don't understand. Seen through the lens of psychoanalysis, we realize that emotional pain in families doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the residue of old wounds, buried needs, and quiet grief that never got the chance to heal. In this video, we're going to explore 7 psychological reasons why a child may not see the value in their mother, reasons rooted in love and resentment, longing and guilt, the gap between what was idealized and what was real. These are subtle, invisible forces working in the deep currents of the soul, often without anyone being fully aware of them. Understanding these unconscious dynamics doesn't magically make the pain go away, and it won't turn indifference into appreciation overnight. But it offers something even more powerful: clarity. Clarity sets you free. It lifts the weight of unrealistic expectations. It quiets that endless question of where you went wrong. It helps you accept that real love isn't always met with the gratitude we hope for, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. A mother who feels overlooked or unappreciated carries a history of quiet love, sleepless nights, gentle gestures, whispered encouragement, protective glances. She holds memories that shaped her child's life in profound ways, ways he may never fully recognize, and that story cannot be undone. A mother's worth doesn't come from the thanks she receives, but from what she built in silence, what she held together without applause, the love she gave without any guarantee of return. Freud believed that true emotional freedom begins when we accept that others are free to feel or not feel, to recognize us, or not to love us in their own way, or not at all, and that our value doesn't hinge on anyone else's response. Letting go of the belief that love must always be reciprocated is a powerful act of maturity. It's an act of self-love and deep compassion for oneself. If your child can't see today what you've given him, that doesn't make your gift any less remarkable. The love you poured into him built invisible foundations that still hold him up whether he realizes it or not. And once a mother truly grasps this, she can finally breathe a little easier. She can stop blaming herself for things that were never her fault. She can see in her own heart the strength of someone who gave with open hands, who cared without measure, who offered the best she could under human circumstances. Freeing yourself from guilt doesn't mean forgetting your pain. It means looking back on your own story with tenderness, with pride, with gratitude. It means knowing that being a mother is like planting seeds in soil where blooms may take years to appear, and even if you can't see the flowers today, they exist quietly and eternally in the deepest parts of the soul that's been loved. Emotions are messy, and the recognition you long for may come late or not at all. But true love never disappears. In the end, it defines who we are far more than applause or visible appreciation ever could. If these words have touched something in you, then know this: your story of love is worthy of being honored, first and foremost by you. If this reflection spoke to you, take a moment to enjoy the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future stories and insights like this one. Take care and see you next time.